Welcome back to If I Knew You Better. I'm Brendan Davis, your host. I really appreciate you being with me today. And this week, I have a very special guest. And what's interesting is this guest was suggested to me, I'm going to say about a year ago, by a guest on my other podcast, How China Works, Mr. Mark Levine, who is a friend who is an expat in China with quite an interesting story. I'm going to link that show in the show notes if you want to check out Mark's pretty amazing story. And Mark and I have had several touch points and connections, and he was part of a big live event. He actually helped put together a big live event that I hosted and co-hosted with Ying Li in Beijing at the Bookworm Cafe before it closed. But if you don't know what any of that means, it doesn't matter. You can learn more about it via the link I'm going to include. But my guest today is someone who is equally fascinating as Mark is, and that's actually saying something. And that is Mr. Josh Levine. Josh, welcome to the show, sir.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I don't want to start off the show arguing with you, but I don't know if I'm as fascinating as my dad. He is quite a character.
He is quite a character, but I think I know I am, and I think in your own way you might. I'm guessing you might own that yourself a little bit. Before I ramble on, please go ahead.
Oh, I have my moments.
Well, please, give us a little short version of who you are and sort of where you're from, and we'll go from there. Give us kind of your short background.
Sure. So I'm here in LA, where I've been since I came for college. I grew up in San Francisco and spent my adult life in college in UCLA and in Los Angeles since then. Between kind of the music industry, entertainment, and the brand space. And I've built a career around essentially helping creative people achieve their goals, make more money, build their brands, all of that. And that's led me into a lot of interesting situations, from consulting and kind of ad campaigns to more recently my own podcast, Rebel Radio, where I have conversations with people that make culture for a living, art, music, fashion, film, that kind of stuff. And we find out how and why they bother with that. I sort of navigate those worlds between entertainment, brands, and creative people.
Well, I appreciate that description in a lot of ways, mostly because it's clear, but of course also I'm finding things that I relate to, which is how I do this. And I imagine I've listened to your show. Show's awesome. That
Cool.
was actually the initial thing that, I guess I didn't say your dad is Mark, but I mean, you're here on your own recognizance, as they say.
That's right.
And then some, but yeah, your show's fantastic. And I realized that, okay, your show and what I'm, doing here, in my mind, there are a lot of parallels. You're just kind of talking to, because of your world professionally and whatnot. I mean, you're dealing with different folks, different kind of level of people in the entertainment business sometimes, and have a different focus, but I relate to it. And how did you develop? I mean, have you always been curious like this? Is this something, how do you trace your interests that led you to this life and this career? I mean, did you see that as a kid? What was it like, kind of early days?
I like to say that my successes are the result of just a series of mistakes, which is partly true. There's been a lot of one foot in front of the other, and I feel like as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, you kind of build plans, but then there's real life, and so. For me, I've always got kind of one eye on the plan and one eye on the road, so to speak. To answer your question, yeah, I mean, I've always had a curiosity about people. Some of that is back to my dad. I was an only child, and I grew up in, pretty unique environment where I was surrounded by adults. My dad had a big group of people around him kind of at all times. And so I was surrounded by adults and surrounded by people I didn't know and constantly meeting new people. Somehow kind of along the way developed a talent for getting to know people and getting to, bond with people and hear their stories pretty quickly. And that's kind of really carried me through, everywhere I've gone.
I will not take you through your entire timeline of your life and bring you forward and, and have this be solely your bio, but I do want to ask,
whatever you want to do.
Cool. Well, I where I'm going with this, I mean, you're a very unique person to talk to about a few things related to entertainment and music, kind of specifically, but the broader, as you said, brand space, entertainment space in general. So that's mostly what I want to talk about. But I do want to ask, what did you study at UCLA? And was that like sort of a long-term goal, or was that sort of found your way? How relevant, what did you study and how relevant was that to what you actually became as of sort of today as we record?
No, it's a great question, and I'll give you the answer in a little bit of a roundabout story. So, when I was in high school, like most kids, I didn't really have a plan. I saw the movie Oxford Blues, where Rob Lowe is poor and he goes to Oxford and, gets the girl, whatever happens. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. I'm going to go to Oxford. And I'd literally never heard of Oxford until that moment. And then, I told my grandmother and she's like, really? That's okay. Good luck with that. So then I forgot about that. And then I saw Wall Street and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, hang out with Daryl Hannah and maybe skip the prison part.
Sure.
Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen Wall Street.
Don't drop the soap.
But I was like, yeah, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to Wall Street. And so I'll go get a business degree and then I'll go to Wall Street. So I was still, not sure what I wanted to do. I was visiting my mom who lived in LA. I lived in San Francisco. And she was like, let's go take a tour of a college. And so I said, okay. And we went and toured UCLA. And I left going, okay, that was great. I'm going to go to UCLA.
Yeah.
And literally it was that easy. So then I applied and by some miracle I got in and I went to UCLA and thought that was my route to Wall Street. Turns out that it's not a great, this is another discussion, but that's not a great path to Wall Street because UCLA doesn't have a business school and all that stuff. But I hadn't thought about any of that. I'm living in the dorms with athletes. My 3 dorm mates were all on the football team at UCLA, and the guys, downstairs of us were the basketball team and hanging out with gymnasts and like that. I just got really immersed in athletics. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to go to law school and I'll be a sports agent because I know all these athletes and I can represent. I never thought about the fact that by the time I got out of law school, those guys' careers would have been over pretty much.
Right.
Not the point. So anyway, the point of this is I was kind of lost and floating a little bit. But again, it was always like, oh, there's a goal. I'll go after that one. And then it would just shift as I go. And so one day through a friend of my roommates, I learned about an internship at Motown Records in the A&R department. Now, at the time, I didn't know what an internship was. Other than I'd heard about doctors who were interns, but I never knew about corporate internships. Yeah. I didn't know what a record label was other than, I had a decent record collection and I knew that there was a label and I knew of Motown Records, like, Smokey Robinson and Marvin Gaye and stuff like that. But I didn't know what a label did. And I didn't know what an A&R person did. I didn't even understand that there was a business of making music. It just wasn't something I thought about. So I go, well, why would I want to intern at Motown Records? And she goes, well, you work about 8 hours a week and you get free CDs.
Sign me up.
Sign me up. Done. Right. I didn't need anything more than that. So I go in for this interview and these 3 guys are like so excited to offer me this golden opportunity, to be at the front door to this industry that millions of people were dying to get into. And I was like, so unimpressed by that. I was just like, I don't know what you guys are talking about, but here I am. And about a month later, everything shifted for me. And I said, okay, this is my life. I'm going to make music for, my career. And this is everything I want to do. And so the next several years was really about kind of putting all those pieces together. And so I was interning there. I started writing for the Daily Bruin, the newspaper at school, about music. and kind of became their rap music critic. I was the only kid in, 1990 who worked at the paper that knew anything about rap music. And I started managing some artists, and it just became this snowball of a career that kind of took shape as it went.
That's a pretty interesting plant that came from that initial random seed that like kind of got thrown in your window from a friend of your roommate, and you not knowing exactly, like not knowing really almost anything about it, but they were just glad to have somebody who was that they must have really needed somebody when you walked in the door, and I guess they got that you were interesting, thoughtful, something. They saw something in you that made them go, yeah, this guy would work.
In hindsight, I mean, they had a few interns. They had this little internship program going. Mm-hmm. I like to think that I impressed them with my disinterest, right? Like that I wasn't clamoring. I wasn't like, frothing at the mouth to get in there. I was kind of like, I didn't care, which I think is, I think that's important. I tell people now when you're interviewing for a job, you need to not care about getting this job, right? You need to go into this with the expectation that I'm going to spend 30 minutes with somebody and I could learn something. I could learn about them. I could learn about myself. I could learn about the company, the industry, whatever. And that's how you get not nervous about the outcome. And so, again, I didn't know to do that at the time, but I just kind of did it by accident. And so I think that worked. But that's been, my whole career has been really not having that switch inside your head that makes you scared to do stuff. And it's not that I live without fear, because I don't, but there's a lot of things that I've achieved in my life and career only because I didn't know any better. I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to be able to do that. And so I just went and did it. And sometimes it worked out and sometimes it didn't.
We were talking before we started recording that we discovered that we share this sort of Gumpian journey through our life.
That's a great term.
I've been applying it to myself for a few years, and I've met a few fellow travelers along the Gumpian, kind of not chaotic, but along that path. And I mean, I think back about, all the lessons. I was the kind of weird kid who read a lot of philosophy and stuff before I understood it. It just the words were interesting, interesting concepts, and I guess some of it deeply implanted. And later, when I had the framework to begin to understand it and started to learn it properly, it sort of started to connect the dots in a maybe more meaningful way than if I just picked it up as a college sophomore. And the idea of serendipity and trying to be open, I got sort of, your dad's in the East and you've been to China, obviously. So I don't know how much sort of Eastern thought. That's fairly Zen of you, us, me. It's sort of a Zen approach to this. Do you relate to that, or do you just you can understand it, but you don't feel that?
No, I very much do. Somehow Zen, I studied philosophy a little bit in college.
Me too, for like 5 minutes, basically.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah.
But I remember reading now I won't remember which books, but I remember reading, a bit on Zen, reading the Tao, and just feeling like, they had codified a lot of things that I believed anyway. Yeah. And that stuff really spoke to me. And so and for me, the Tao especially, right? Like this idea, I always say, I live in Southern California, a mile from the beach. I should be a surfer, but I'm not.
That's funny. Yeah.
But I think we should all be surfers.
Yeah.
Right. Because because it's a metaphor for life. Right. Which is that you're not going to change the ocean and the waves. The best you can do is ride it.
Yep.
Right. And, take it as it comes and be ready. And, you know, my understanding of surfing is that, you know, when you try to control the waves, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You got to be ready, right? And you got to not try to overpower it.
Well, I think there are a few lessons here. I'm imagining this is where I connect a bunch of seemingly random dots in theory from the things we talked about with the not frothing, with the approach you took in the interview, and how now you learned, oh yeah, you know, that's actually an appropriate, like that's something to teach people. That's actually like a style or a philosophical approach that should be taught because it's effective. What you talk about, and we discovered this on a call, I think a week or so ago when we were discussing like the surfing metaphor. We both use this, although neither one of us is a surfer. One of my business partners, Larry, is a crazy surfer, you know.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. He just got his second Mavericks gun. So he's a nut about it. He was telling me yesterday, so excited about this new surfboard. So I hear a lot about it. I feel like I'm kind of related to a surfer or something.
Nice.
But in terms of that type of approach, the sort of, you know, be like water, approach, how do you sort of like in a management, because you wear multiple hats and have worn multiple hats. And this is, again, a place where, of course, we can relate. A lot of people do this these days, but there's some parallels between a few of our hats, or at least, you know, I have other friends who are in your world, et cetera. So I have some, you know, I have a little bit of prehistory here. And in terms of, you know, failed rock star is my first career. I don't even know if we talked about this, but I was a guitar player in a rock band years ago. We had about 5 minutes of people knowing who we were and stuff, you know. And what I learned getting into that and getting into meetings with A&R, with like the head of A&R for Sony and these different, you know, there were like 3 labels that were really interested in us. Everybody saw us, you know, a bunch of them passed. A few of them were lukewarm, but 3 of them were hot for us. And so getting into those meetings and the kinds of questions that were asked, and there was a diversity, but what I'm getting at without getting granular about my story is that it was an education in, you know, creative people in a creative business, but putting on the business hat. Yeah. And the ability of the people who are successful in those types of jobs, because we were meeting, you know, kind of mid-level and senior executives and, you know, heads of A&R. I mean, because we met the more junior, we met the scouts and people. That's how we got to meet the bigger people. Right. And so, but seeing how that was the big revelation for me. That was the switch, because I was in my kind of mid to later 20s throughout that whole process. And being able to realize, oh, I mean, I knew it intellectually. I was aware of it, but beginning to understand what something about the framework or psyche of people who work in the entertainment business and can understand art and do, you know, live in the world of appreciating the craft of what's delivered, but also have that ability to zoom out, look at the market, look at the, you know, do the cost benefit analysis, see where the creative rough edges are, see where maybe there's some, you know, how is this artist, or, you know, going to fit into the framework of the lattice work of the whole industry at large and the market, and then what the company's doing and who else is on the roster and who's releasing this year. And so I over about a 3-year period of our 5 minutes was about 3 years out of 8 of our total existence, but about 3 years of, you know, being in these kind of conversations and meeting folks with a lot to share. And so it was a massive education. So what are, I'm dying to know, what are just, I'd love you just to like open up the fire hose and, you know, hit us with some of the things that you really learned, those deep game things that either just are, you know, either it sounds like such a fortune cookie that people miss the real deep lesson underneath it. Like don't want it too much. Is maybe a way to say your interview experience. You know, surf the wave that's there, surf the wave you've got. What are some of the things that you have learned that are either so simple it seems reductionist, you know, but there's more to it, or things that are sort of hard to put into words and it's going to take you a story to tell me. But I'm dying to know what you tell. Like if you're sitting around, here's the context. Pretend you're sitting around, you know, in the appropriate relaxed environment with a, you know, fairly fairly senior, you know, like music, like artist or executive, someone who really has some skin in the game, some decades and some not, you know, imagine you're hanging out with like Dr. Dre or somebody and you're sort of like having a scotch or, you know, a sip of water or whatever. And you're reflecting on like things you've learned, like things you wish, like the people you care about who are up and coming. You wish you could just impart that to help them just shortcut 10 or 20 years of pain and get them to where they need to go. What are some of those things that you think about? You know, maybe some hard realities. That's a giant question, but I'm expecting.
I mean, it's a great question, and I think I think you touch on some things that are really often misunderstood. You know, in business and in life. So let's see if I can come up with anything decent.
I'm sure you got a lot of it. Yeah, I just need to shut up now. Well,
no, I mean, so look, the first one that occurs to me. You know, when you say Dr. Dre, and I'm going to say two things that kind of contradict back to my Taoist thinking, right? Yeah. And so one is if you're creating, you got to create for yourself. And the minute you're trying to make something for the fans or the market, you've lost. You know, first of all, you know, if we're talking about art, and I use that in the broad sense, you know, but any artistic work is a reflection of its creator, of who they are in that moment. And, you know, the extent that we as audiences relate to it is how much it touches something inside of us that's either our reality or our fantasy. It's escapist, it's, you know, visceral. And so no focus group would have created NWA or Dr. Dre or Eminem or anything else he's doing. And I'll give an example of that from my own life. So in the 90s, I was a manager. I was a talent manager. I started a really small, semi-successful artist management company. And quick side note, the way it happened is I was in college and a guy I met at orientation turned out to be a musician and he asked me to manage him.
Okay.
I didn't know what a manager did. But I said, okay. He didn't seem to care that I didn't know what a manager did. And so I was his manager for a little while. And I learned. And then I went on and became a manager for real, you know, built a company, et cetera, et cetera. And during that time, a guy that worked for me happened to be the guy who, before he worked for me, he worked in the mailroom at Interscope Records. He's the guy that found the Eminem demo, got it to Dr. Dre, got whoever to pay attention to it. And this is a kid in the mailroom that, you know, no one needed to listen to, but he was squeaky enough that they couldn't shut him up. So they played the demo and they ended up signing him. So he comes to me one day, he goes, you know, this is before Eminem's record had come out. So we knew who he was kind of from the demos.
But you didn't know what it was going to be. I mean, you hadn't seen the response.
Right. No,
hadn't happened yet.
Right. And so we knew that once, you know, we knew the one song that was out there.
Some Shady. Real Some Shady.
But it certainly hadn't shown any commercial success yet.
It was kind of like that first Beck single. I remember it was like it came off as like alternative rap, or, you know, for lack of a better term, but it's sort of, it was as a consumer hearing it for the first time, like seeing the video on MTV. And so it was like this cool, weird indie. It felt like an indie rap thing.
Right.
But the fact that it was Interscope was like, oh, okay, there's like serious people behind this, like Jimmy Iovine and blah, blah, blah.
Sure. So, so very early on, guy to work for me is like, hey, Eminem needs a manager. You know, let's go meet with him. And I said, if you want to take the meeting, I'll take the meeting. White rapper is not going to happen.
Okay. All right.
And obviously I was wrong.
Yeah.
And, you know, but my point is, I had every reason to think that way, right? Because the focus groups that were playing in my head, would have led me to that conclusion.
The reference point was Vanilla Ice.
Yeah.
That was
Absolutely.
it. Yeah.
Beastie Boys were, 10 years past their
Yeah.
prime by then, right?
Sure.
Like, it just, there wasn't a market until there was.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of, that for me was a big illustration, not of like, not that, I should have managed Eminem. Who knows if he would have signed with me? Who knows if maybe I would have been the wrong manager for him and his career would have turned out very differently, right? Not that, but in like thinking that I knew too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you take the meeting?
No, I didn't. I didn't. We kind of like traded calls a couple times trying to
didn't happen,
set up the meeting, and it just didn't.
Yeah.
It just fizzled out.
Somebody else might have gotten to him before.
He found the right manager, and the rest is history. So, but
that was your setup to something else. Let me shut up again.
Yeah. So what I learned from that is don't think you know every damn thing, because you don't, and that Eminem. That was my point, right? That as a creator, Eminem wasn't thinking about the market.
Mm-hmm.
He was thinking about, I have to do this because this is my life. Like, this is what I have to do. Every day I wake up, I have to make this music because I can't not do it. And so, for anyone in a creative situation, that's how you have to be thinking. The flip side to that is once the creativity is done, then you have to know your customer better than anyone else. And, I work, as I said, with a lot of brands. I work with big multinational car companies, liquor, soda, all these companies. And the thing that I always, every single conversation I start with, who's the audience? Who's the customer?
Mm-hmm.
And what can you tell me about them?
Mm-hmm.
And whenever they finish that sentence with, it's males 18 to 24, it's millennials, it's some broad generalization. Sure. I go, you guys are not ready. Mm-hmm. You don't know who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
I always think of the analogy as the personal chef.
All right. Yeah.
Right. So if you're in a position, you're wealthy, or you're in a position to have a private chef who cooks for you full time.
Yeah.
That is the ideal brand customer relationship.
Okay. Yeah. Very, very curated.
Very curated. I know everything about my customer
mm-hmm.
and what they want,
mm-hmm.
what time they like to eat, what they like to eat, what they're allergic to,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
how their tastes differ,
mm-hmm.
from week to week or from day to day, right? Like, I know everything about this person that I need to know.
The actor Kevin James, always like really heavy, and then he got relatively skinny, and he's maintained. He's kind of stocky instead of being giant fat guy.
Sure.
When he got after King of Queens went to second season, basically he hired a girl who's a friend of a friend, awesome, like mm-hmm. a top vegan chef. He hired a full-time vegan chef. Yeah. And she started, and she did the whole diet profile on him. And so I'm adding to your metaphor only to say that, if you do it and you do it right, then the results can be super tangible.
They can be transformative. And what's interesting about what you said is, I'm going to guess he wasn't a vegan before.
No.
And so,
what she did was so awesome. And I'm a pretty much an omnivore myself, mm-hmm. but I mean, she cooked several times for my little gatherings for my friend at his place, and it was awesome. I mean, if I had her cooking for me, I'd eat that every day.
So my assumption, or the story I'm going to tell, is that she was able to change his behavior because of the trust that she'd built with him by understanding who he was and his needs. Right. And if she had walked in on day one and said, let me fix you a bean sprout salad.
No steak. Yeah. That's right? Done, big boy. That's
what most businesses do. Right. Is they go create the thing, and then they try to sell you on it.
Yeah, they try to kick the door down and dump it in your living room or dump it in your lap, and this is exactly what you want. But
absolutely,
but is it? Is it really?
And that works sometimes.
Yeah.
When usually you have a lot of money.
Yeah.
Like Coca-Cola. You have a lot of time, like Coca-Cola is built over decades, right? Like the brands and even those companies, right, have a really hard time with it. But the brute force method really only works when you have massive money and a lot of time.
Yeah.
And the rest of us, which includes 99% of all companies that exist, need to be a hell of a lot smarter than that. And smarter means really knowing your customer.
I've always been struck whenever and it's been a while since I'm mostly in film these days and television, but, used to be in the music industry. And then I've been sort of adjacent to it really on and off my whole life. And so I've had friends who, I mean, I've gotten to know various people and have friends who are close or still very like you, who are very much in the business. So, I've always had that sort of secondhand gossip. I've always had that secondhand informational pipeline of what's not in the trades, what's not even in Hits magazine or something, But what I've noticed, like person to person, if you are sort of in that late night having a candid moment with somebody who's got the experience and's got the track record.
Yeah.
They typically also, they attribute a lot to luck, right place, right time, those kind of things. They attribute, great, insane work ethic, which is just goes, this is part of the picture. And there's a deep game psychology. There's an understanding that this is a huge generalization and it's not meant to be said in the wrong way, but especially a lot of the people in urban music who, whether it's just their legend or it's the reality, but like I came out of the hood and I survived like these gunshots, like these people who've basically faced life and death stuff early, but they made they obviously are alive. They have just learned things like when they've confronted their mortality. They seem to have learned things about reading people, being insightful, not letting the distractions distract them, when it matters.
Yeah.
And having that kind of focus is a hard thing, do you, and it's interesting because I thought a lot about this in my own ways, and I really want to get your take on this. Because again, just coincidentally or not, again, we sort of both had our Gumpian, paths through our careers and have had some, you've done pretty well. And I've had some pretty good plateaus and milestones along my little path as well. But there was no indication that was going to happen. I mean, there was like no early days. There was, I had a friend of mine I reconnected with some years ago. I hadn't seen her in forever, but I knew her from like when she was in grad school and I was in undergrad. Anyway, and she told me on like the second bottle of wine, with her and her husband, chatting, she there was a point where she just said, I just wasn't sure. I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad you made it. I'm like, what are you talking about? And it was such an interesting revelation because I realized how wide open I was to all experience and everything. And now, with age and maturation and whatnot, I'm still, I'm not as wide open, of course, for a lot of reasons, but I do survey sort of everything. I take in everything that I can, and I try to stay up on things that are relevant or interesting to me. But the focus, I had to learn that. Yeah. Did you, it sounds like you also had to learn it. How did you learn that sort of, did it come out of like, you mentioned Motown experience was very transformative. What did it really start there? Because I know I'm sure being in that environment, you're going to see a lot of people who are, mission driven, on task, because you got release dates and money's being spent on, so how did you learn that? How did you learn to sort of zoom in on something and really, You know, kind of swarm it.
I think I'm still learning that.
I still am too. I'm just, it's a thing. Yeah. How did you start to get a handle on that?
No, I mean, I think that's a lifelong journey. And, you know, as you said, you know, my podcast, you know, I interview, we're coming up on interview 200 of, you know, people that are successful in creative fields. And I think one of the things we've uncovered is that there's no single path to success. And so some people I know are incredibly focused and, you know, almost to a fault. They tune out, you know, they refuse every meeting that's not mission critical. They tune out all of the noise out there. And they really just pick on one thing and they go after it. And that works for them. There's other people that, you know, play the field. They're in 3 or 4 different businesses. You know, they're investing, advising, and consulting, and, you know, trying their hand at a few different things, and that works for them. And there are as many people that are unsuccessful at either path as well. So I don't, you know, I alternate. I think focus is important, and I think certainly when you're in what we would call production mode, if you're on set in a movie or finishing a record or whatever, you got to be laser focused. Otherwise you're going to miss your deadline and, you know, everything's going to fall apart. At the same time, you know, if we're talking about, you know, the music industry as an example, I came up in the 90s when, you know, when all these people were hard driving and they were building. And I remember, you know, feeling in the early 90s, you're surrounded by this community of people who are on their way up in the music industry. And we're seeing Puffy go from being an intern to a CEO. We're seeing, you know, I knew half a dozen people like that, not necessarily, you know, to reach Puffy's level, but to literally go from interns to, you know, VPs in 3 years. And there was just this energy that there was no limit to how big things could become, how successful you could become, et cetera. And then what happened? Look at the late 90s, you know, around 2000, the music industry imploded. And, you know, ask them, they'll blame Napster. But the reality is a big chunk of that was the fact that there was so much tunnel vision on your own goals that you're not paying attention to the way the environment's changing around you. And so that was a lesson for a lot of people, myself included, that, that again, is back to the surfing, right? Like if you're too focused, you're trying to control where that board goes. But you don't have control over where the board goes because you're in the ocean.
I don't do it, but you got to feel what's happening and go with that.
And I guess, you know, I'm not a surfer, but, but my point is the ocean's going to do what it's going to do.
Exactly. Ocean going to
ocean. Want it to or not, whether it's part of your plan or your focus. Right. And so, you know, my career as a music manager ended, largely through that kind of situation, right? Like I was busting my ass and, you know, I stopped managing because of a series of setbacks that taught me that how hard I worked and how hard my clients worked or how talented they were was not enough of the factor to determine how successful we'd be.
Right.
And you know, I had my best year ever at that point in my career, you know, at 27, whatever, followed by my worst year ever. And I was like, I didn't do anything different. And my clients didn't do anything wrong. Like we all did what we were supposed to do, and it just didn't work out the way we thought it was going to. And so I pivoted. We didn't have that term for it yet, but I pivoted into something that, you know, that I felt would give me a better sense of control. And I use that term, like, again, we don't have control in life.
Right. But it's nice to have the illusion. You know, we all have these. I mean, Maslow, we're down there. That bottom base of the pyramid is of Maslow's. Pretty important to try to have a few nails, even if you know that the nail is in quicksand. But it's important to feel like you've got a couple of anchors in there, you know.
I think security. In 2020, everyone's learning that whatever your plan was doesn't really matter.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Yes. And so the best we can do is ride the wave, right? Is be nimble. But, you know, again, you're right. Having that feeling of control, the illusion of control that, you know, is important. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know, turbulence is scary no matter how many studies you read to show that you're safe.
Yeah, exactly.
It's scary.
Yeah, they're over-engineered by a factor of there's like 100x over-engineering on pretty much everything on your plane, except those cabinets in the bathroom that are always, there's like the one that's half open and you try to get a towel and it won't stay shut. And you're like, okay, this makes me feel great.
That's right.
I mean, this is visible. This is visible and it's broken. What can I not see that's not working? But yes,
that's exactly
not to torture it to death, but well, you have such I mean, we could do a whole talk just about your podcast. We could do a whole talk just about the early days, but and we're skipping so much because, you know, you've had a life, but
of course,
let's talk about what you're working on now. I really wanted to shine a nice light on this because you've put together, or in the process still of putting together something pretty damn cool.
I appreciate that.
This will come out in 2-3 weeks from when we record. So be sure to throw the date out there of when this is, and for people who might be relevant person to check this out.
Yeah. So thanks for saying that. So I'm in the middle of production right now on what we're calling the AMP Music Summit, which is a virtual music industry conference coming up on May 6th. And the theme really is to highlight stories, examples from people who are pivoting right now in response to what's happening, you know, in the music industry related to COVID. You know, again, this is a year when no one's plans are going to work out the way that we thought they were. There will be winners and losers, as there is in everything.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily even mean that in the competitive sense, because I think, you know, to some extent we can all win. The scarcity
metaphor doesn't apply to entertainment. I mean,
certainly in entertainment, it's not a zero-sum game, right?
Yeah.
But you know, again, our tendency when we hit turbulence in life, our tendency is to grab the armrests and wait and hope for it to be over as quickly as possible.
Right.
And that metaphor breaks down because when you're in a plane, there is nothing you can do except wait for it to be over. But in business and life, waiting for it to be over is the worst response possible.
Yep.
And so there are some people, and I try to count myself among them, who throw themselves into action. And, you know, again, faced with uncertainty about what the future holds, I think the best you can do is work your ass off and be creative and bring your best to the table. So, a couple friends and I who have been kind of slowly, quietly looking for opportunities to collaborate, you know, started seeing all the cancellations of conferences and festivals and all this stuff, and decided, we know people who are doing great things and trying and learning. So let's bring those people onto a virtual stage and try to have I would call it a bit of a brainstorm. And so our hope is to, you know, inspire people to just challenge their thinking or find ideas they can try or whatever.
Is it sort of like a combination of sort of keynotes, or maybe like a la TED Talks combined with sort of panel discussions, things like that? Is that the structure of it?
Exactly. And hopefully, you know, I think we're bringing together people from different parts of the industry. We have people in the live music business, the ticketing business, the record labels. We have some artists. We have journalists who cover the space, right? And so, you know, even some people from outside of the industry who might share relevant insights. And again, I think, you know, so much of it is when you're under pressure, our natural tendency is to try to find comfort.
Sure.
Right. We try to find what's most comforting to us.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we need other people to spark ideas and inspiration.
Well,
to help us kind of break out of that.
Sorry, I stepped on you there, but I'm sitting here nodding, mostly silently in understanding, and yeah, having that commonality of the shared experience of we're all going through this. You know, it's one thing, and nothing against this, but it's one thing to see it on your socials and kind of the broader scope of people you know, and then when you within the industry though, that's part of what I think is really great about this, because I've been I've participated or attended a bunch of these things between like the Rap and Stage 32 and, you know, these various film and TV. I've been down these rabbit holes for the film and TV business. People are putting together some pretty cool events. And so for your event for music, I mean, I'll talk to you offline, but I mean, I'm planning to, you know, I'm going to plan to log in and listen, hopefully, if I'm invited.
Awesome.
And, you know,
you're definitely invited.
Thank you. So who would be, the people that you would want to attend basically are music professionals and people who are sort of adjacent to that, or as well as aspirational folks. I mean, what would you say is your intended? Because I know sometimes there's a limit on how many people can join these things, depending on if it's 100 or 1,000 or 10,000. It kind of depends on the way it's put together. So you're probably trying to curate the audience so that they get value. Because if you're talking like super nerdy,
absolutely,
if you're talking about the hit to mechanical royalties and stuff, I mean, the casual person's going to go, "What are you talking about?" Sure, you know.
I mean, and that's, you really hit on the challenge of these kind of things, right? Is that there's, you know, if you're too big picture, it's not usable to people. Right. And if you're too granular, it's also not usable to people outside of that, you know, specific area. And so we're trying to strike the right balance there. Mm-hmm. We're trying to, you know, for me, it's about lessons. Right. And so if somebody's, I heard someone say a couple weeks ago that if you still think you're in the same business you were in 2 months ago, you're in trouble. Nope. And I think that's true for nearly everyone on earth. Mm-hmm. Right. And, and, you know, and so the path forward may be really close by, or it may be pretty far away, depending on who you are and you know, depending on your situation.
You do and
and how much money you have socked away, and like all these different factors that are individual, right? But I have a good friend who's in the fashion business, and now she's in the masks business. And so that was an easy pivot for her because it's adjacent to what she's doing. It's still different. And, you know, but had she really been stuck to the aesthetics of the, you know, dresses that she was designing or whatever, right? Like
she'd be waiting for a while.
That wouldn't happen for her.
My movie's on hold because it's set in the world of Paris fashion, and you know it's a movie, so we're going to make our own movie magic. But we're not built. But we're also going to be shooting at and behind the scenes of certain key shows of designers, and you know who are going to agree to be in the show in the movie. So, bottom line is, it will be all of my friends in this industry. I've been deeply in this for 2 years now. You know, been to Paris last year for Fashion Week to, you know, do that and meet people and start these conversations. And the bottom line is, like, that industry, just to on your friend's very smart. And I have a few friends in that industry who've done the same thing, because there will be no fall Fashion Week because they would have to be designing it. They'd have to be preparing it right now, and they're not.
That's right.
If there's a spring, even if there's, you know, no one expects a vaccine in time for there to be a normal. There may be a spring Fashion Week if there's treatments, but you know, but there still may be an issue of if you travel, you got to quarantine, you know, instant testing, and if you're questionable, quarantine. There are all these new issues. Just something as simple as let's go to a place and do a thing. You know.
Well, and I think my favorite thing about what you just said is maybe. Mm-hmm. Because that is so challenging for us human beings.
Hard to plan. Hard to have that bottom two layers of the pyramid we talked about with Maslow. I don't know why I'm on Maslow today, but yeah, it's hard to have those. Right. It's hard to have those really feel solid if maybe is the only good answer to any real question.
100%. But you know that, you know, I've learned that in however long I've been in business is that, you know, a lot of times maybe is the best answer you can get. I mean, it's the best you're going to get.
Yeah. Why do you, I agree, but why do you, I want to hear you say why.
Well, you know, I have, so I've had this agency, right? We help brands with marketing and, you know, a lot of entertainment partnerships, all that stuff. Right. So, you know, it could be a music festival sponsorship. It could be a you know, brand ambassador deal, whatever, anything like that. So we're constantly in project management mode, right? We've got a campaign for a client. It needs to launch on X date, and there's all this work to be done in between. So I've learned to coach my people that if you think the outcome that you're hoping for is also the most likely one, then you better have a plan B.
Yep.
Right? Could be simple things. Could be the rain, you know, the weather that you're not expecting. It could be, you know, issues related to permits. It could be, are people going to show up to this event? It could be like, you know, there's a whole bunch of things. Yeah. But when you don't have contingencies, you're screwed.
Hashtag Fire Festival.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You compare the organization of a Coachella versus, you know, that.
So when you have to have contingencies in life. You can never have a contingency for everything, right? You know, that's the other thing I've seen working, you know, along the way is people think, well, you know, we can't guarantee this, so why bother planning at all? Right. And so
I can endorse that.
Right. So as you said earlier, there's always an element of luck, an element of risk in everything we do. There's always, so the job of management, I think of you know, of all business is let's get as close as we can.
Yeah.
Let's also remember that no matter how close we get, nothing's guaranteed. So let's be ready to ride the wave if it doesn't hit the way we're expecting it to.
Josh, that's a pretty awesome place to wrap this up. I think I realized as you tell me this in my head, I thought that the conference was June, but you're May 6th. I'll put this out next week because I'll put this out on what is Friday, May 1st, I believe. So I'll put this. So if you're listening to this right now, dear listener, you were listening. If you get it the day that I dropped it, like it's hot. If it's still hot, then that's May 1. So nice. I'll include the link to that, of course, in the notes as, of course, Rebel Radio. Is there any other place people should find you on the internets, or I guess the podcast and the festival is a pretty good start. How do you like to be sought out or found if you do?
Yeah, I'm easy. I'm open everywhere. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You know, I'm always looking for interesting people to connect with. You know, you kind of never know what's going to happen. And I've met people on every channel who've turned out to be friends or collaborators or, you know, who knows what.
Awesome. Josh, thanks so much, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.